Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I pulled into the parking lot on a Monday morning, boxes of Cat 6 plenum cables stacked in my back seat. 8 hours of driving, and now I was looking at a few days of crawling through drop ceilings to wire 30 network drops. The building owner refused to put in low voltage lines himself, and the quotes we got were ridiculous. So here I was. Our company was moving a remote site to this new building. My boss asked me to handle the network setup since the landlord wouldn't budge on doing any of the wiring himself. I'd done this kind of work before, running all sorts of cables through buildings, so I figured it would be messy and itchy with all that insulation up there, but manageable. The facilities manager came with me. We walked in that first morning and it was actually pretty nice. Cool summer air, comfortable enough. Then an hour passed. The facilities manager asked if it was getting warm. I told him I'd noticed the same thing. By noon, the thermometer read 80 degrees. By 3 in the afternoon, it hit 85. The rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows turned into actual greenhouses. I was up in the ceiling pulling cable, sweating through my shirt, covered in insulation fibers. One of the workers still on site mentioned something that made my blood boil. He said they'd told the leasing company 3 weeks ago the AC wasn't working. I asked him if he meant 3 weeks, and nobody had fixed it before we moved in. He just shrugged and said he guessed not. I looked around. There were still construction workers everywhere. The building wasn't even finished. I said out loud that this place was supposed to be ready for handover today. The facilities manager agreed that it was unbelievable. Day 2 started at 80 degrees. The heat was already unbearable when we walked through the door at 8 in the morning. The facilities manager spent half the day on the phone yelling at anyone who would listen. He kept telling people he didn't care what it took. Someone needed to get out here and fix the AC. I kept working, pulling cables through the ceiling. That's when I found it. A 4-foot hole in the ducting. The AC was running, pushing air, but none of it was cold because it was all escaping through this massive gap. I called down to the facilities manager that I'd found why we weren't getting any cold air. He asked what it was. I told him there was a huge hole in the ductwork. Someone finally told us the compressor was broken. Great. Just great. Day 3, same misery. I was finishing up the last connections on the patch panel when the AC repair guys showed up around 10. They disappeared into the mechanical room and worked until 2 in the afternoon. The facilities manager asked them what they'd done. One of the AC guys said they'd done a lot of things. The facilities manager pressed them, asking specifically what they'd fixed. The AC guy said they couldn't tell the tenants. I asked if he was serious. They left without explaining anything. Red flags everywhere. The facilities manager contacted our realtor, and she sent an email that night. The facilities manager read it to me. She said they'd changed the refrigerant from R22 to R410A. I told him there was no way. I explained it was like putting gas in a diesel engine. They'd have to replace the entire system. There was no way they'd done that in 4 hours. The facilities manager asked what they'd actually done then. I said they duct taped it back together. Maybe used some WD-40 to get things moving. That system would run for maybe a month before it completely died, and then we'd be stuck paying for a replacement. Day 4. Still no running water in some areas. Construction workers still hammering away. The AC ran non-stop but couldn't keep up with the afternoon sun. We were packing up, getting ready to move everything back out. That's when I noticed something wrong with the fire sprinklers. The metal protection plates around the drop ceiling tiles were on the floor. Some sprinklers weren't sticking through the tiles anymore. Others hung way lower than they should. I asked out loud if those AC guys had stood on the fire sprinklers. The facilities manager asked what I meant. I told him to look. They'd stood on the sprinkler heads to reach the ductwork. The facilities manager said I had to be kidding. We called the landlord immediately. The facilities manager told him they hadn't delivered a finished building. We were moving out. The lease was broken. The landlord said we'd signed a 5-year lease. 36 pages. We weren't going anywhere. Our corporate lawyer and realtor both said we were stuck. We needed a way out. I started examining the fire system more closely. I used to run low voltage lines for fire and security systems, so I knew what to look for. I told the facilities manager there was no fire panel in our section. He asked what that meant. I explained it meant none of these smoke detectors were connected to anything. No alarm system. One of our guys moving equipment mentioned something else. He said he'd never seen any building permits posted anywhere. I asked him to repeat that. He said, yeah, no permits. They demolished walls, ran new plumbing, ran new electrical, destroyed the fire system, all without a city permit. I told the facilities manager to call the city inspector. He asked if I thought that would work. I said I thought we'd just found our way out. Day 5. I wasn't there for this part, but the facilities manager called me later. He said I wasn't going to believe what happened. I asked him to tell me. He explained that the city inspector came out and pulled the permit records. There weren't any. He found multiple code violations and red-tagged our entire area, removed the certificate of occupancy. I asked if he'd checked the fire system like I told him. The facilities manager said, yeah, the inspector took one look and said he had to make a call. He called the fire marshal right there. 3 days later, the fire marshal showed up. No active alarm system in our section. Red tag. Then they found the sprinkler riser for the entire building in our area. No water pressure. They condemned the entire building. The landlord tried to keep us locked into that lease, even though they never delivered a working building. So we got the building inspector involved. He called the fire marshal. Now the whole place is condemned. They already refunded our deposit and rent, but we're pushing for more. All the time spent moving equipment in and out. All the wiring I installed. Our lawyer says they don't have a leg to stand on. The facilities manager told me the lawyer was actually happy to let them pay his fees too. I said good. They earned every bit of this. I moved to this quiet street 15 years ago thinking I'd found the perfect spot. 5 houses total, friendly neighbors who knew each other, the kind of place where people looked out for one another. We even threw block parties 3 times a year. Everyone showed up except for one guy. He lived across from me in a duplex tucked behind some trees with a long paved driveway leading up to it. I could see the rental side of his place from my window, but I barely saw him for the first 10 years. He kept to himself, never came to the parties, never waved. I figured he was just a recluse and left it at that. The weirdness started when I hired painters to work on my house. I had plenty of parking in my driveway, but for whatever reason they decided to park on the street in front of his property. The next morning, concrete blocks were lined up along that entire section of curb. In 10 years, not a single car had ever parked there. His house was way down a driveway anyway, so it's not like anyone was blocking his access to anything. I thought it was kind of funny at the time, figured the guy was just eccentric. Then a year and a half ago, my wife got a letter in the mail. No return address, no signature. The letter said hello to her by name and explained that since she knew a lot of people in the neighborhood, could she please make sure these boys stayed off his property. Attached were printed photos of 3 kids. One was our 7-year-old son. Another was his friend who lived next door to this guy. The third was another kid from down the street. The boys had been cutting through his driveway to get to each other's houses faster. I was annoyed he didn't just knock on my door and talk to me like a normal person, but it seemed like a reasonable enough request. My wife and I called a meeting with the other 2 families. We sat all 3 boys down and told them very clearly not to go on his property anymore. All 3 of them said, okay, no problem. During that meeting, I learned that my son's friend's dad was in an ongoing legal battle with this neighbor over their property line. Apparently, it had been going on for almost 2 years. The neighbor kept insisting the fence was 3 feet over on his side. That explains some things. 2 days later, someone knocked on my door. It was another neighbor from down the street and he was holding a printed sign. The sign said if these boys were seen on the property again, he would call the police. It had the same 3 pictures of the kids printed on it. The neighbor told me these signs were posted on every power line and street lamp within 6 blocks of our houses. We walked around together and took them all down. There were at least 20 of them. I was furious. Who does something like that? Who plasters pictures of kids all over the neighborhood like they're wanted criminals? I gathered up all the signs and the original letter and took them to the police station. The officer looked everything over and told me the guy was a terrible neighbor but hadn't technically done anything illegal. He said unless the neighbor actually harassed the kids directly or threatened them, there wasn't much they could do. I set my son down again and asked if he'd been on the property. He swore he hadn't. I showed him the letter and signs and told him this guy was creepy and to stay far away from him. My son looked scared, which made me even angrier. I also started keeping a closer eye on things when my son played outside. Things stayed quiet after that. Then last summer, my son's friend's dad passed away suddenly. Heart attack at 43 years old. His mom had to move away with the kid because she couldn't afford the mortgage on her own. It was sad to see them go. The duplex rental sat empty for about 2 months. Around the same time, a young boy came up to my son while he was playing in the front yard. The kid introduced himself and said he and his dad had just moved into the rental side of the duplex across the street. The two boys became friends quickly. I pulled the dad aside one day and explained the whole history with his landlord. I told him about the letter, the signs, everything. I said my son could never come to his place because of the situation, but his son was welcome at ours anytime. He thanked me for the heads up and said he appreciated the warning. About a month later, he showed up at my door with a letter from his landlord. It said he was violating his lease because his girlfriend had been parking on the driveway at night, even though there was plenty of space and she was parked way off to the side. The letter also said he was working on his motorcycle, which was against the lease. He told me he'd only worked on it twice, both times during the day on a Saturday. After only 1 month of living there, he was getting evicted. He had 30 days to move out. I told him to go ahead and park the girlfriend's car in front of my house and to work on his bike on my property anytime he wanted. He asked if I was sure and I said absolutely. A few days later, there was another knock at my door. I opened it to find a man I'd never seen before standing there. Turns out it was my neighbor. First time I'd ever laid eyes on him. He was older than I expected, maybe 65 or so. He told me he needed to talk about his tenant's girlfriend parking in front of my house. I said I'd given them permission to park there. He insisted they needed to stop because it made the street look cluttered. I asked him what he wanted me to do since I didn't own the street. The city did. Should I put cement blocks out there like he did? Take pictures of the girlfriend and post them all over the neighborhood? He started to say something about respecting property values, but I cut him off. I told him to get lost. I slammed the door in his face. I watched through the window as he walked back to his house. The next week, the tenant texted me. His girlfriend's car had been broken into. She hadn't locked it, and someone had gone through the glove compartment. An old phone was stolen, worth maybe $40. There was also an unsigned letter on the seat telling her not to park there. The letter said if she continued parking there, worse things would happen. I told him to call the police right away. They came out but said without proof there was nothing they could do. It was a civil matter. The officer took a report but said it would likely go nowhere. Then I remembered something. I'd installed a security camera on my house a few months earlier after someone stole a package off my porch. I pulled up the footage from that night and there he was, clear as day. My neighbor walking up to the car around 2:15 in the morning, opening the door, rifling through it for about 3 minutes, leaving the letter on the seat, walking back to his house. I saved the video and made 3 copies. I sent one to the tenant along with a written statement detailing everything my neighbor had done to us over the years. The letter to my wife, the signs with the kids' pictures, everything. I also sent a copy to the police department with a formal complaint. The tenant moved out the following week. He didn't have much choice with the eviction notice, but before he left, he told me he was filing a lawsuit against his landlord for illegal eviction, breaking and entering, theft, and harassment. He asked if I'd be willing to testify and provide the video evidence. I said absolutely. A few months went by and I didn't hear anything. Then, about 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the tenant. He said his lawyer had used my video and statement as the main evidence in the case. The landlord tried to deny everything, but the video was too clear. His lawyer argued that my neighbor had a pattern of harassment and illegal behavior. The judge agreed. I just got word last week that he won. The judge ordered my neighbor to pay him $8,000. $5,000 for illegal eviction, $2,000 for harassment and emotional distress, and $1,000 for the stolen phone and damaged property. The tenant also told me the judge issued a warning to my neighbor. If there were any more complaints about harassment or illegal activity, he could face criminal charges. I haven't seen my neighbor since the judgment came down. His car is still there, but I never see him outside. The rental side of his duplex has been empty ever since. No for rent sign. Nothing. But those concrete blocks are still on the curb across the street. I've been running low on a few things around the house, so I figured I'd make a quick run to the local store. The drive took about 10 minutes. Pretty standard trip. But when I pulled into the parking lot, I could already tell something was off. There was this commotion near the front. Two women absolutely losing it over what looked like a parking spot dispute. From what I could piece together while sitting there, one of them was about to park in a certain spot when the other one swooped in and took it. They were screaming back and forth about who got there first and who had the right to the spot. The smaller woman kept pointing at her turn signal, saying she'd been waiting for the spot. The blonde one kept yelling that she got there first and that was all that mattered. Typical parking lot drama, right? Except this wasn't staying at the yelling and hand-waving level. The bigger of the two women, this massive blonde lady who just screamed entitled attitude from every pore, suddenly stormed back to her car. I watched her yank open the door, reach down into the compartment, and pull out a gun. My stomach dropped. I was still sitting in my car, engine running, and I probably should have just backed out and left right then, but I couldn't. My body just froze up. It's weird how fear does that to you. I noticed other people around the lot had their phones out. They were calling the cops, describing what was happening and giving the exact location. I could hear one guy near me telling the dispatcher that there was a woman with a gun in the parking lot and that she was threatening someone. Meanwhile, this woman was waving the gun around like it was nothing, threatening to shoot the other lady right there in front of her kids. She was yelling that nobody takes what's hers and gets away with it, that she'd blow her brains out right there if she didn't move her car. And yeah, there were kids in the back seat of the other car watching all of this. Two little kids couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. The smaller woman didn't back down though. She kept arguing right back at her, saying she wasn't going to let some crazy person push her around, that she had every right to that spot. I don't know if that was brave or just plain stupid, but part of me respected it. Another part of me really wished she'd just get back in her car and drive away before this turned into something worse. There were others like me, just sitting in their cars, waiting for this mess to end. Maybe 6 or 7 other cars scattered around. I wasn't trying to be nosy or anything. I just didn't want to make any sudden moves in front of someone holding a gun. What if she thought I was a threat? What if she was crazy enough to shoot at a moving car? I ducked down a little and kept watching, hoping the police would show up soon. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. After about 5 minutes, a cop car pulled in. A female officer stepped out by herself, drew her weapon, aimed it straight at the blonde woman, and started yelling at her to put the gun down. She was ordering her to drop the weapon and get on the ground. That this was her only warning. At first, the woman acted like she couldn't care less. The cop was shouting orders, weapon drawn, looking intense enough to make me nervous, and I was just a bystander. But the blonde woman just stood there like nothing was happening. She even turned and looked at the cop like she was annoyed by the interruption. Then something shifted. Maybe reality finally caught up with her. Maybe she realized she was actually about to get shot by a cop. She started moving slowly, lowering herself to the ground. She put the gun down next to her, raised her hands, and laid flat on her stomach just like the officer told her to. The cop approached carefully, holstered her weapon, pulled out handcuffs, and reached for the woman's hands to cuff her. She was telling her to keep her hands where she could see them, and to not make any sudden moves. And that's when everything went sideways. The blonde woman had to weigh over 300 pounds easy. The cop was maybe 170, soaking wet. In one swift move, the woman flipped over, grabbed the officer by the arm, and after a few seconds of struggling, slammed her flat on her back onto the pavement. The sound of the cop hitting the ground made me wince. Then she started throwing punches. just swinging wildly at the cop's head. The officer was covering her face with her hands, trying to reach for her belt whenever she could, but this woman was just too heavy. She couldn't shake her off. I wanted to help, but I was terrified. What if I made things worse? What if she had another weapon? When the punches finally stopped, I thought maybe it was over. But no, the woman reached for the cop's gun. She was yanking at the holster, trying to pull the weapon out. The officer was fighting to stop her, grabbing at her wrists, but she got her hand on the holster. She was screaming that the cop should have minded her own business, that she was going to show her what happens to people who get in her way. Before she could actually grab the weapon, though, this huge muscular guy came out of nowhere and got her in a chokehold from behind. He must have been in one of the other cars waiting like me. But unlike me, he actually did something. She immediately let go of the gun and started clawing at his arms, trying to break free. Her face was turning purple, but this guy was solid. He wasn't budging. He pulled her off the officer, dragging her backwards while keeping that chokehold locked in tight. The woman was trying to scream, but nothing was coming out because she couldn't breathe. Her legs were kicking, but it wasn't doing anything. Then the second the cop got back on her feet and was ready to make the arrest, he slammed the woman's head into the pavement and held her down. The cop was breathing hard, had blood on her lip from one of the punches. She grabbed her cuffs again and this time got them on tight. She was telling the woman she was under arrest for assault on an officer, that she just added years to whatever she was already going to get. The cop finished cuffing her just as more patrol cars started rolling in. 3 of them showed up within maybe a minute of each other. 3 officers hauled the woman up and shoved her into the back of a squad car. She was still trying to yell through the window, but nobody was paying attention to her anymore. Paramedics checked on the female officer while other cops talked to the guy who jumped in. They seemed friendly but serious, taking his statement clearly grateful for what he'd done. One of them shook his hand and patted him on the shoulder. Another cop was talking to the smaller woman who'd been in the original argument. She was crying now, hugging her kids who'd gotten out of the car. A few officers started talking to the rest of us who'd been sitting in our cars watching. They took my statement too, asked me what I saw, what time I got there, if I'd seen where the gun came from. I told them everything. It took about 20 minutes before they let me go. I kept checking the news, following the story. It was all over the local channels that night. They showed footage from someone's phone that had been recording. Last I heard, the woman got 15 years for aggravated assault on an officer plus a bunch of other charges. Attempted murder was one of them. Reckless endangerment, illegal possession of a firearm in a parking lot. The list went on. The guy who saved the cop's life got an award from both the police department and the city. They gave him a plaque and $500 as a thank you. He gave a short interview saying he just did what anyone should have done, that he couldn't stand by and watch someone hurt a cop. I'm glad she got what was coming to her. 15 years is a long time, don't get me wrong, but honestly, the most satisfying part for me was watching her in that chokehold, completely helpless, unable to break free no matter how hard she tried. Maybe that's what she needed, to feel what it's like when someone bigger and stronger has complete control over you, to know what all those people she terrorized felt like. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.